He'll tell a joke while he's gone.
Tell the one about the bartender and none. I love that.
I got a different one. I don't have that one. What do you call a fish with no eye?
I don't know.
A fish.
Oh, crap. From the Beer to Whiskey Studios, high atop Barley's Tap Room on Washington Street in downtown Greenville, South Carolina, I'm Russ Heaps, and welcome to this episode of It's Just Bourbon. And that's where I get together with my good buddy here, Big John Richards, who's really the beer whisperer at Beer to Whiskey, but he's got a great palate. We like drinking together, so we do these bourbon segments as well as all the other stuff we do.
Because we can.
Because we can.
And also
And
for
why
you.
not?
Right.
And why not? Why not? Anyway, today we are going to talk.
Stuck on the Alive at 5 stuff.
I know. We're going to talk about Angel's Envy Bourbon, which is finished off in port barrels. And one of the interesting things about Angel's Envy is it was the first bourbon. It's been around since 2011. Do I remember that correctly?
Yeah.
It's been around since about 2011. And this is the first bourbon that produced a year-round product that was aged in a port barrel or a sherry barrel or anything like that. They sort of paved the way, which makes this a very interesting liquid.
Well, and I was so surprised by that when we were sitting down, because so many distilleries are making such a big deal about their new port barrel aged version of whatever thing they have, that I was not even aware this was even aged in port barrels.
They don't make a big deal.
It makes perfect sense, but yeah, exactly. How would you know that it says port barrels on the front of the
does.
bottle?
But you never hear anybody really talk about it that way. And they we don't think that they distill their own juice. It says that it's Kentucky sourced, so it is a Kentucky bourbon. It doesn't come from MGP in Indiana, it comes from Kentucky. And they age it up to about 6 years in charred oak barrels. And then they dump it into port barrels for another 3 to 6 months. And what you come up with is this. It's 86.6 proof. And the mash bill is 72% corn, 18% rye, 10% barley. The price is somewhere between $45 and $50 a bottle. It's fairly accessible. You can find the Angel's Envy bourbon pretty much anywhere. The Angel's Envy rye, which is aged in, I think, sherry barrels, is a little bit tougher to find, but this is fairly accessible. Anything you want to add?
Not at the moment. I'm stuck talking about port. We were at a loss as to whether we were going to talk about the difference between ruby port and tawny port, but it just seems superfluous at this point.
It does. I'm only gonna pour a little touch, although it's more than it looks like.
Trim. But yeah, that's a good solid ounce in there.
I'm gonna pour myself less. No, I
Give it
don't
to
think
me.
I did.
I don't think you did either.
I tried. This has been a long day so far. Anyway,
it gets that way.
yeah.
Work is hard.
Yeah, it is. This is a tough biz. This is a tough biz. One of the things I like about Angel's Envy is you can find it in a lot of places. You can find it in a lot of restaurants. You can find it in a lot of bars. It's not a huge bourbon in terms of its influence or its taste, obviously around 86 proof, but it is it's like a General Motors, it's like a Cadillac of bourbons. It's a General Motors of bourbon, but it's very accessible, affordable, and in my opinion, pretty good.
I've always enjoyed this bourbon, and I'm really excited to sit down with the knowledge that it's port barrel aged and kind of try and pick that out. I also have a question after we take a sip and try and talk about it for a second, because I think it'll play into some conversation. But I'm ready. Yeah, I'm ready when you are.
The other thing I'm going to mention is I think this was a participant in one of our annual blind bourbon tasting events that we sort of gave up on this year, simply because time crunches and whatever.
Give up on it. We had a pandemic and a snowstorm.
We did.
I'm not sure which one of them was worse in South Carolina.
But between those two things, we didn't do one this year. But we did a couple of others with bourbon, and I think Angel's Envy was part of one of those. And I know
like
the
it
Angel.
was.
It may not have been.
I do feel like it was. I'm agreeing with you.
Oh, okay. So forget it.
But we'll verify that off camera, and Russell will run something by on the bottom that says
I will.
these guys
I'll
are
say
both
yes,
down.
we did, or we didn't, or whatever.
No. Ready to figure this one out.
Text Miss Lily.
Still don't know that I smell the port barrel the way I do on some of the other ones.
Well, that's one of the reasons why I don't think much of anybody knows that.
Right. Well, and you get to like the Basil Hayden's that's aged in port barrels, and you know it.
Yeah.
It smells like cherries. And this is aged in ruby port barrels, so it's going to have some of that berry flavor to it, or it should. And I suspect it does. I'm probably smelling, and because you know what, I'm getting some of that green apple thing again. But I think behind it, I'm getting kind of a raspberry or a cherry thing, maybe. Just
See,
a
I'm
little
not.
bit.
I'm getting when that initial taste finishes. I'm then getting a burnt sugar.
Yeah,
Brown sugar, burnt sugar kind of thing.
that was when I stuck my nose back into it. It was all caramel. It's so hard to pull some of that stuff off the nose of these full-bodied or full-strength whiskeys as well, because the ethanol can be so aggressive. You're trying so hard to let the aroma come to you instead of trying to dive in for it.
Right. And I forgot to bring my water dropper.
Well, we can go get a spoon or something if we need to.
We can. In fact, I'm going to go do that.
A horse walks into a bar with a set of jumper cables around his neck. He walks up to the bar, and the bartender says, "All right, horse, I don't mind the long face, but don't go trying to start anything in here."
Wow. You can go ahead and bring the kids in, because this is kind of where we're at.
You got like 2 perfect drops and then a third.
I did.
Yeah.
So this is a Guinness spoon that we got from behind the bar here at Barley's, and it's getting
Well
well water
equipped for
into
these
it.
kinds of things.
Exactly.
I already smell more butterscotch.
Yeah.
Man, you stick your nose in there and just barely inhale. I think you can get some of that port. I'm still just trying so hard to really identify that barrel.
I don't have the ability to sniff out those nuances.
Ooh, man, the water really brings out the spice. There's a lot more of the barrel in there that I taste once I added that water now. I don't know that it's the port, it's the wood more than it is the port itself. There's a lot more spice in there.
So despite the fact that I don't think they distill their own juice, they do have a distillery, which basically is where they blend what they get, and it's on Main Street in downtown Louisville, which is part of the Whiskey Row section of town. And the other thing that maybe is worth mentioning is they are owned by Bacardi.
And that was recent, right?
Yes.
4 or 5 years ago.
Yes, I think maybe even more recent than that.
So this was my question from earlier. So we've got some other people, I guess, are doing these. There's the whole story of the Angel Share. That's the evaporated part of the whiskey. Then I think it's Jim Beam that has the Devil's Cut. Somebody else does an Angel Share whiskey, do they not? Angel's Envy. These are not related products,
No.
right?
No.
None of those are related to each other?
No. All those things that you mentioned, none of them are aged in port or sherry
Right.
or French wine barrels or any of the other things that some of these distilleries are doing. But this is, I find this kind of remarkable just because it's the first bourbon that they just decided that, hey, they came right out of the chute. Hey, we're going to be a port-aged bourbon, and they did. And now there are a lot of people who have followed them into that.
Yeah, I would have, before today, I would have never guessed that Angel's Envy was its own brand. Even though I've had enough of it and I've worked around it plenty of times, yeah, I would have guessed all along that this was a sub brand of a bigger brand. It's big enough to hold your attention, but not so much that you couldn't just sit there and sip on it, neat, which is effectively what we're doing here, even after adding a couple of drops there.
It's basically neat.
Yeah.
Um,
All right, here's to it.
So damn lucky. See you next time.